Pathfinder is the OG movement legend, with his abilities being a pathway to crazy movement that some consider to be unnatural. His ultimate allows for great rotations for him and his team, as well as letting you take high grounds in the endgame, with his grapple ability separating the worst Pathfinders from the best. I played Pathfinder for well over 100 hours, and here's what I've learned. Despite what everyone says, especially what Reddit says, Pathfinder actually does have a passive. Not only is he a recon class legend, but his passive enables you to get the most out of scanning the beacon. While all recon class legends get to scan the beacon to get information on the next zone quickly, Pathfinder not only gets a reset on his zipline cooldown, but he also gets a 10-second reduction on his ultimate per beacon scanned. Now, as ziplines aren't really that useful outside of setting up positions and rotating, I can see why people consider this passive useless. Keeping that in mind, it's still a close contender with Wraith's passive, Hindsight of the Void, for the worst passive in the game.
They might be watching you.
But I'm getting ahead of myself. Next up isn't necessarily a passive, but Pathfinder has a very large hitbox, and he is very tall with blocky, easy to read animations. This is a double-edged sword, as this does make it unfavorable to take team fights, but the increased height gives Pathfinder the ability to peek over certain obstacles that other enemies cannot. A good example of this are these boxes that you can find scattered around all of the different Apex maps. Other legends simply can't do anything when playing behind one of these crates, but Pathfinder will head glitch just by standing behind it, meaning only his head is exposed and giving him a huge advantage when taking any fight. The grapple is what turns Pathfinder from a walking fridge to Spider-Man. My legal team has warned me about using Spider-Man references, so I'll be treading very lightly from here on out. When playing Pathfinder, you have this new crosshair in the middle of your screen. When it's blue, you're in range and your grapple will attach to whatever you are aiming at. And before I dive into all the ways that this grapple can be used, make sure that you've hit the like button. The number one thing any Pathfinder can do to get the most out of their grapple is to jump right when the grapple lands. This gives a little bit of upwards momentum, which will carry you forward and feel like a certain superhero. If you're stuck underneath an obstacle without a wall, such as a platform extending above you, you can aim upwards towards the platform, grapple and walk backwards at the same time, and then jump while holding the backwards movement key as soon as the grapple connects. This sends you backwards a little bit and allows you to swing over the obstacle. And this logic applies to all of your grapples. Make sure to always side strafe and jump in some way when you want to start a grapple, as this will help you clear even more ground. At a first glance, the grapple use seems like a simple repositioning tool, but you quickly learn that it is so much more. Of course, you can simply grapple from one point to another, but you quickly start learning that if you pull yourself to the side of the object and break the line of sight as you pass it, you'll gain so much more momentum in a so-called slingshot, and then you just keep on going. There is a second type of slingshots that would take you even farther, but require a bit of setting up until you can do it naturally, and it'll take a little more than 100 hours to get that right. We're talking about super grapples. Super grapples are these magical things where you line up your crosshair next to an upwards facing ledge right on the edge, then you move your aim pixel by pixel until your crosshair is no longer lit up. After that, and you'll find that you still connect despite your crosshair no longer being lit up. The timing is slightly different than a standard grapple, and you want to jump right when the grapple starts pulling you rather than when it hits. This will launch you upwards and farther at a much faster rate than a normal slingshot. You can also use side inputs to air strafe and adjust your trajectory on the way up. Abusing air strafe allows you to control your webs just like Peter Parker. I just want to do a quick disclaimer and say that the grapple can be used in infinite ways, and it's in your best interest to play around with it as much as possible to realize what you can do with it, because it's impossible to cover all scenarios in a guide. I mean, there are times where you don't want to jump at the start of a grapple to get horizontal movement, so it is all about feeling. There's also the amazing Pathfinder move, the Grapple Hop, where you grapple towards the ground and jump as soon as a grapple hits to instantly get a jump with good verticality, then cancelling it at the peak of the jump by hitting crouch, which allows you to jump onto much higher grounds or to jump over and juke out your enemy. You'll get even more distance out of your grapple if you understand sliding and ledge basics. Any legend gets a slight boost if they slide over a ledge, especially if coupled with a jump at the right time, which is right after you left the ledge but before you can't jump anymore. This specific jump is also known as a coyote jump. You also want to make sure that the most of your grapples result in you landing on a descending slope, and that you don't land too harsh, but instead come at it at no steeper than a 45-degree angle. This allows you to keep your momentum and continue forward. If you manage to pull off a long slide with the grapple, you can combine it with a wall hop towards the very end as you start slowing down to get even more distance with your grapple. Keep in mind that the grapple's distance is calculated not only by the distance of the grapple itself, but any momentum momentum afterwards, meaning that a maximum distance slide after even a short grapple will result in a full 30-second cooldown. Grapples can also be combined with tap strafes, but for the sake of controller players watching, we won't be covering that other than me briefly mentioning that you can scroll bunny hop to get even more distance with your grapple, or to bounce off of obstacles on the way with ledge boost. This can be taken to another level by chaining it with a tap strafe, which allows you to turn up to 180 degrees after landing while still retaining that momentum. Because the grapple's cooldown is dynamic from 10 to 30 seconds, depending on how much distance you clear from it, you want to make it a habit to make your grapples as clean as possible. And if you can, cancel your grapples when midair by hitting the crouch button to make sure that you don't get a longer grapple cooldown than you need. This does take some time to get used to, especially as your grapples generally will look different if you're expecting to cancel them, but it will make it worth it, and you'll be able to constantly reposition yourself with as short of a grapple cooldown as possible. Now, short grapples are just as useful as the longer ones, sometimes even more so. A short grapple indoors can swing you out of danger or into that one enemy that's low and healing up. Keep thinking of ways that you can slingshot yourself even if you're stuck indoors. And who can forget about this technique? When you connect a grapple to an obstacle and swing around it. This is clearly what separates the bronze Pathfinders from the best. You can also grapple enemies. This will pull them off things like a zipline and pull them towards you while you also are being slightly pulled towards them. Keep in mind that you can't actually do anything when grappling someone, but the enemies that are grappled can shoot you back. You can always cancel the grapple by pressing the crouch button. I could go on for forever talking about the grapple, and if you want to learn even more about it before we continue with the ultimate, I've covered all of this and even more in depth in a guide that I'll link in the description. Pathfinder's zipline gun is one of those ultimates requiring a little bit of forethought and pre-planning. It doesn't serve many uses in the middle of fights unless you're caution, and generally serves the use of rotating your team to the zone or onto high grounds. As I mentioned in the intro, you can also use the zipline gun to gain full control over high grounds by bridging different unreachable high grounds together. A good example of this would be the silos on Overlook on World's Edge. You can also use the ziplines in the final round of the game to stall it even longer when enemy teams are fighting each other. Ideally, you want to have a high ground and then place your zipline so it crosses the middle of the final ring. Then you'll have to take the zipline when you're forced by the zone and then continue to keep jumping on and off until only one team is left standing, which is when you drop down and clean them up. Unlike a certain Gwen, you won't take fall damage, though there will be a little bit of a fall stun, so keep that in mind. Pathfinder's large hitbox means that you very rarely want to look for 1v1s, and if you do, you want to abuse your crouch spam a lot to make you as small of a target as possible. That being said, you'd rather want to avoid the 1v1s by using short grapples and taking off angles, looking for good damage on the enemies, and then maybe grappling into cleanup once you know that they're low and isolated. Because of this, Pathfinder generally wants to run a mid-range primary, such as the R301, and a shotgun as a secondary to help with the cleanup grapple to shotgun strategy. If you're looking for a more technical guide on how to play Pathfinder, I've also made one of those, and it's available on the screen right now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow.